They laughed at her. They interrupted her, tried to smear her reputation. Now they were the ones who wanted to be heard. Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to heated debates. She was used to challenging questions, especially from biased media outlets. But this was different. The invitation to the show had been extended in the name of a policy discussion. But from the moment she stepped onto the set, the atmosphere was unsettling. This was not a simple exchange of opinions, but a prepared tactic. The first question seemed normal, but then one of the hosts leaned forward, his tone changing. "Let's be honest, Caroline. You're not here because of your ability. You're here because of your loyalty, right?" The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense. A few chuckles from the audience, some meaningful glances at each other. Caroline remained calm, but she knew that this was no longer a conversation. It had turned into a performance, and she was the target. She took a deep breath and replied calmly, "I'm here because I earned my position. If you disagree, let's talk about policy, not personal attacks." But they didn't want to talk about policy. They wanted a reaction. Another host chimed in, his tone full of sarcasm. "Did you really get that? Or was it just a reward for loyalty?" This time the audience applauded. Caroline knew that this scenario had been set. The questions weren't meant to be debated, but to discredit her. Whatever she said, they would twist or ignore. But she didn't waver. She stood her ground, sticking to the facts, refusing to be led into a knee-jerk reaction. Toward the end of the show, one of the hosts looked directly at her, dropping a final provocative line. "People like you are just holding us back. You're just a pawn, and deep down, you know it." There was a moment of silence. Even the audience didn't know how to react. Caroline clenched her fists under the table, not out of anger, but out of a deeper understanding. They weren't attacking her because they believed what they said. They were attacking her because they were afraid. She slowly gave a knowing smile. "If standing up for my beliefs makes me a pawn, then so be it. Media storm and TV nightmare. So be it, but at least I'm not a puppet." Caroline's final words came just before the cameras cut. They thought they had the story under control. They believed the damage had been done. To her, not to them. But they misjudged. Within hours, the clip had spread across social media like wildfire. Twitter, YouTube, conservative news platforms. All were awash with images of the confrontation. At first, the network tried to control the damage. They cut the clip, framing it as a normal debate. Familiar headlines quickly appeared, trying to calm the public. But this time, it didn't work, because the entire unedited footage had been leaked, and it told a completely different story. Outrage erupted, not just from Caroline's supporters, but also from neutrals who couldn't deny what they'd seen. They didn't argue with her, they attacked her. The hashtags #media bias and #stand with Caroline exploded. Republican politicians who had been on the show criticized it. Conservative commentators analyzed every frame, every sentence. Even some liberal journalists admitted that the show had gone too far. But what was more worrying for the network was that it didn't stop on social media. The phone calls and the money threats sponsors began to get involved. Viewers weren't just angry, they were strategic. They flooded advertisers with questions. "Why are you sponsoring a show that so openly degrades women because of their political views?" Some companies chose to remain silent. Some issued general statements about respect for different viewpoints. But then one of the biggest sponsors decided to pull out. Their statement was carefully worded. They didn't want to be associated with divisive and unprofessional discourse. That was the first domino to fall. Others quickly followed. At the station's headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. Internal sources leaked that the leadership was panicking. Emergency meetings were held back to back. The CEO demanded an explanation. The host, initially silent, finally issued a hasty statement. "Our show welcomes lively discussion and differing opinions." But it was too late. Caroline in the last card. While the media storm continued to rage, Caroline remained silent. Not a single post, not a single interview in response. She didn't need to speak up, because now there were whispers of something else. Some sources claimed that she was preparing legal action. Not just defamation, but intentional harassment, professional damages, and perhaps even a coordinated media plan to destroy her reputation. In an office in Washington, D.C., pale yellow lights reflected off thick stacks of documents. Karoline sat across from her legal team. Outside, the media storm was still raging, but she knew the biggest storm was still ahead. The legal battle and the unprecedented crisis. The papers were still warm from the printer, the ink not yet completely dry. They lay on the table, in the middle of a room filled with tension. The numbers, the lines, the evidence. They all said one thing. This was not just a personal lawsuit. This was a fight about accountability. Karoline sat quietly, her eyes scanning the pages. In front of her, one of the leading media lawyers put down his pen, leaned back, and said in a calm but sharp voice, "We have a strong case. Defamation is an obvious angle, but we can also argue for professional damages. This is not just criticism, it is a deliberate plan to destroy your reputation." Karoline did not rush to answer. She was not the type to get into legal battles out of personal feelings, but this time was different. She knew that if she backed down, it would happen again, not just to her, but to anyone whose views did not fit within the system. She took a deep breath. Go on. Secrets exposed. The deeper they dug, the more terrifying the truth became. Internal emails emerged. Leaked messages between producers and editors showed that the segment was not a formal interview. It was pre-planned. One line in particular stood out. Make sure she stumbles. Cut her off if she gets too comfortable. This was not journalism. This was an ambush. And when these documents were leaked, the news exploded. Karoline Leavitt is officially suing. The media went wild. The network's response was immediate, in chaos. Their lawyers rushed to issue a statement, calling the lawsuit frivolous and a desperate political stunt. But words could not mask the consequences, because this was no longer a story about Karoline. It had become a story about media ethics. Viewers began to ask, if they had nothing to hide, why did they panic? The system began to collapse. The calls from advertisers poured in. Many companies began to withdraw. The show's ratings plummeted, but the blow did not stop there. A former producer spoke out. At first, she remained anonymous, but then, in an exclusive interview, she decided to go public, and what she revealed changed everything. This isn't the first time. We've been instructed to do this. Conservative guests are always put in a difficult position. We're told to cut them off, to re-edit them to make them look as bad as possible. She didn't just say it. She provided emails, memos, and even unedited footage from previous interviews. And when those videos were released, it became clear. This wasn't an accident. This was how they operated. Karoline's lawsuit was no longer a legal dispute. It was an exposé. The network couldn't control the story anymore. They had lost control. The crisis inside the network. Inside headquarters, the atmosphere was thick. The CEO barked orders. Legal teams gathered around the conference table, trying to figure out how to control the situation. PR pros managed to craft the perfect statement, but they know, this time, they may not get away with it. The question is no longer, how do we put out the fire? It's, can we survive this? The battle isn't over, but for the first time in years, they're no longer the ones in control. The historic trial and the truth revealed advertisers continue to pull out. The network's list of commercial partners shrinks by the day. The network attempts damage control with an official statement. We remain committed to free and open discussion. While we regret any misunderstandings, we maintain that our host acted within the bounds of a lively debate. But that message did not appease anyone. In fact, it made things worse. Viewers saw right through the pretense. Outrage spread. The next day, the show's social media plummeted. Comments were turned off, but dislikes soared. Many advertisers continued to cut ties, leaving only vague statements about reevaluating partnerships. The message was clear. Big corporations didn't want anything to do with this. The TV station collapsed. Then came the first big shock. One of the show's main producers resigned. The press release called it a mutual decision, but insiders leaked the truth. They were trying to contain the fire, but it was too late, because now the legal proceedings had officially begun. Caroline's legal team was no longer focused solely on the defamation case. They subpoenaed the TV station's internal records. The goal? To find more evidence of organized bias and a targeted smear campaign. And what they found was worse than anyone could have imagined. A series of emails, memos, and internal instructions were leaked. Everything confirmed one thing. The network wasn't just reporting the news, it was manipulating the truth. The shock, the second accuser comes out, then the crunch. A second former employee came forward. And this time, it wasn't just about a single talk show, it was about the entire network operation. This wasn't an isolated incident. This is how they operate. Conservative guests are always put in a difficult position, interrupted, ridiculed. The story is decided before the show starts. Those statements rock the entire media industry, because now Caroline's case wasn't just about her. It was about the credibility of the entire mainstream press. The final battle in the courtroom, the first day of trial. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat, cameras and laptops ready to capture every detail. Outside, the chaos was no less. Protesters and supporters filled the entire block. News trucks lined up, all waiting for the historic moment, because this was no ordinary lawsuit anymore. It had become a cultural battlefield. Karoline sat surrounded by her legal team, calm, focused. She knew the network's legal team was formidable, but this time they weren't just fighting her. They were fighting their own past mistakes. The trial began. Karoline's attorney opened. This case is not about political differences, it's about media accountability. Our client has not just been criticized. She has been targeted, defamed, and harmed professionally, not through honest journalism, but through a deliberate plan to discredit her. Then the evidence began to roll in. Leaked emails, a former producer's deposition, unedited footage from previous interviews. Every piece of the puzzle pointed to one thing: a systematic bias. Everything began to tighten around the network. The facts were undeniable. The network's legal team tried to fight back. This is an entertainment show, not journalism. They claimed it was all part of a heated debate. They said Karoline was playing the victim. But then, another former producer stepped up to the witness stand, and under oath, she revealed the shocking truth. We were given instructions. The producers were instructed to make sure that conservative guests never came across as strong. Then she read out a shocking email. Don't let her finish a sentence. Keep control of the editing. Discredit her. The courtroom fell silent. That was the moment that shattered any illusion that the interview had been fair. The inevitable consequences. The network's lawyers scrambled to find a way to rebut, but the tables had turned. No one believed in lively debate anymore. No one believed in entertainment anymore. The television networks were pushed to the brink, and the whole country was watching to see who would win this battle. The battle wasn't over, but everyone knew. A new era of media was coming. The triumph of truth and irreversible change. The network's lawyers tried to turn the tables. Guests should expect tough questions. That's the nature of journalism. But Karoline's legal team countered with compelling evidence. A montage appeared on the big screen. It juxtaposed the two types of interviews. Liberal guests were treated with respect. Conservative guests were repeatedly interrupted, mocked, and attacked. The images didn't lie. The jury sat in silence watching. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Then came the financial records, a major turning point in the case. Karoline's team presented data showing that her reputation had been destroyed. Speeches were canceled. Opportunities were taken away. A deliberate attempt to silence her. This was no longer a media debate. It was a calculation. And as the closing arguments rang out, there was only one question left for the jury. Did the network cross the line? The nation waited with bated breath. A historic verdict. The verdict came sooner than expected. The judge entered the courtroom. Everyone held their breath. Karoline sat still, her hands clasped together. The network's legal team, once so confident, now looked exhausted. The judge looked at the jury. The representative stood up and announced, "In the matter of defamation and professional injury, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Karoline Leavitt." A murmur, a gasp filled the room. Stunned expressions. Karoline closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling softly. The weight of the past months had finally been lifted. The inevitable aftermath, the multi-million-dollar deal. The network was forced to issue a public apology, not just to Karoline, but to all the guests who had fallen victim to this tactic. But it wasn't enough to save the day. The show was canceled permanently. The network claimed it was part of a restructuring plan. But everyone knew the truth. The advertisers weren't coming back. The brand had become too toxic. More employees were coming forward to expose other unethical practices. The truth continued to be revealed, layer by layer. This wasn't just a loss for the network. It was a turning point for political media. Karoline's career exploded. She didn't just survive the lawsuit, she thrived. A book deal on media manipulation, speaking invitations across the country, a platform bigger than ever. But she didn't gloat about her victory. Instead, she left the public with a message. This isn't about silencing people you disagree with. This is about accountability. The media shouldn't create reality. It should report the truth. A message no one can ignore. And you, are you standing up for the truth? If this story made you think, share it. The conversation about media, bias, and accountability isn't over. Make sure your voice is heard. Sign up for more stories that challenge the system. Because the truth, it always comes out.